the bullet that grazed Zelda Garrett's shoulder in Silver Creek, Nevada, during the summer of 1878 was meant for someone else, but it shattered her world just the same. She had been standing outside the general store, holding a brown paper package of flour and sugar, when two men came barreling out of the saloon across the street, guns blazing. One bullet struck the wooden post beside her head. Another tore through her sleeve and bit into her flesh. The third killed her husband of 3 months, Thomas, who had been reaching for her hand. He dropped like a stone, blood spreading across his pressed white shirt, his eyes going vacant before he hit the dusty ground. The men who fired those shots were caught and hanged within a week, but justice did nothing to fill the hollow space inside Zelda's chest. She was 19 years old and already a widow. The wound in her shoulder healed poorly, leaving her arm weak and prone to aching when the weather changed. But the wound in her soul, that one seemed permanent. For 2 years, Zelda stayed in Silver Creek, working as a seamstress and keeping to herself. She lived in a small room above the dress shop, spoke only when necessary, and attended church on Sundays with her eyes fixed on the floor. People whispered that she had gone cold, that the light had gone out of her. They were not wrong. She felt like a pocket watch that had stopped ticking, all the mechanisms still present but somehow unable to function. Then came the spring of 1880 when everything changed again. Mrs. Henderson, the woman who owned the dress shop, decided to close her business and move east to live with her sister. Zelda found herself without work and without a home. She had saved a modest amount of money, enough to get by for a few months if she was careful, but Silver Creek held nothing for her anymore except ghosts. She remembered her aunt mentioning a town called Castle Dome in Arizona Territory, where opportunities supposedly awaited those brave enough to chase them. Her aunt had passed away the previous winter, but Zelda clung to that memory like a lifeline. Arizona Territory seemed far enough away to escape the past, yet close enough to reach. The stagecoach journey from Silver Creek to Castle Dome took 5 days through punishing desert heat and rough terrain. Zelda sat wedged between a whiskey drummer who snored and a stern-faced woman in mourning black who never spoke. She watched the landscape change through the dusty window, from Nevada's rocky slopes to Arizona's vast stretches of sand and saguaro cacti. The world out here felt ancient and indifferent, which suited her fine. Castle Dome was smaller than Silver Creek, a mining town nestled in the harsh beauty of the Sonoran Desert. The main street consisted of a hotel, 2 saloons, a general store, a blacksmith, a livery stable, and a handful of other establishments built from weathered wood and optimism. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks sharp against the endless blue sky. The heat pressed down like a physical weight, making even breathing feel like work. Zelda stepped off the stagecoach with her single trunk and looked around. Dust devils spun through the empty spaces between buildings. A few men loitered outside one of the saloons, watching her with idle curiosity. She lifted her chin and walked toward the hotel, her footsteps echoing on the wooden planks of the sidewalk. The hotel clerk, a balding man with spectacles, informed her that rooms cost 50 cents a night. She paid for 3 nights, figuring that would give her enough time to find work and more permanent lodging. Her room was small and plain, containing only a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair with a missing spindle. A single window overlooked the main street. It would do. That evening, as the desert cooled and shadows lengthened, Zelda ventured out to explore the town. She needed to understand this place, to see if she could make a life here. The general store was still open, run by a friendly Mexican couple named the Rodriguezes who welcomed her warmly and told her about Castle Dome's brief history. The town had sprung up around silver and lead mines in the nearby mountains, attracting miners, merchants, and all the supporting businesses that followed precious metals. "Are you looking for work?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked in accented English. She was a plump woman with kind eyes and flour on her apron. "Yes," Zelda replied. "I am a seamstress." Mrs. Rodriguez's face lit up. "There is no seamstress in Castle Dome. The women here, they would be very happy for such services. You should speak with Mr. Patterson at the newspaper office. He knows everyone and everything in this town." Zelda thanked her and made a note to visit the newspaper office the next morning. As she walked back toward the hotel, she passed the livery stable and noticed a man working in the corral attached to it. He was breaking a horse, or rather, he was trying to gentle it. The animal, a beautiful chestnut mare with a white blaze, pranced and snorted but did not buck or rear. The man spoke to her in low, steady tones, his movements calm and deliberate. Something about the scene made Zelda pause. She found herself standing at the fence, watching. The man had dark hair that needed cutting, strong shoulders, and a patient way about him. He wore plain work clothes, dusty from the day, and a faded blue shirt that had been mended more than once. He seemed completely focused on the horse, attuned to every shift in her mood. After several minutes, the mare allowed him to run his hand along her neck. He rewarded her by stepping back, giving her space. Only then did he seem to notice Zelda watching. "Evening," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His eyes were a surprising shade of gray like storm clouds. "Good evening," Zelda replied, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "She is beautiful." "That she is," the man agreed, glancing back at the mare. "Just scared. Previous owner did not treat her kindly. She has forgotten how to trust." Zelda felt something twist in her chest at those words. "Can she learn again?" The man studied the horse thoughtfully. "I believe so. Animals are honest. Show them kindness without expecting anything in return, and they will come around in their own time." He walked closer to the fence, wiping his dusty hands on his pants. "I am James Prescott. Most folks call me James." "Zelda Garrett," she said. "I just arrived today from Nevada." "Welcome to Castle Dome, Miss Garrett," James said. There was something genuine in his voice, as if he truly meant it. "What brings you to our little corner of the territory?" "I needed a fresh start," Zelda said simply. There seemed no point in elaborating. James nodded as if this made perfect sense. "That is as good a reason as any. If you need anything, I am usually here at the livery. I help run the place for Mr. Carson, the owner." "Thank you," Zelda said. She hesitated, then added, "It was nice to meet you." "Likewise," James replied, and there was a warmth in his expression that surprised her. As Zelda walked back to the hotel, she found herself thinking about the chestnut mare and the patient way James had worked with her. Show them kindness without expecting anything in return. What a strange and radical idea. The next morning, Zelda put on her best dress, a deep blue calico that she had made herself, and arranged her dark hair in a neat bun. She wanted to make a good impression. The newspaper office was easy to find, located next to the general store. A wooden sign above the door read, "Castle Dome Chronicle." Inside, she found a cluttered space filled with the sharp smell of ink and paper. A printing press dominated one corner, and newspapers hung from wires like laundry. Behind a desk piled with papers sat a middle-aged man with ink-stained fingers and an untamed beard. "Mr. Patterson?" Zelda asked. The man looked up, pushing his spectacles higher on his nose. "That is me. How can I help you, miss?" "My name is Zelda Garrett. I recently arrived from Nevada, and I am looking to establish myself as a seamstress here in Castle Dome. Mrs. Rodriguez suggested I speak with you." Mr. Patterson's face brightened. "A seamstress? Well, that is excellent news." My wife has been complaining for months about having to order everything from Yuma or Phoenix. Please, sit down. Zelda sat in the chair across from his desk, folding her hands in her lap. Mr. Patterson rummaged through his papers and produced a blank sheet. "Let me take down your information," he said. "I will run a notice in this week's edition, free of charge. Consider it a welcome gift to our newest resident." They discussed details for several minutes. Zelda explained her experience and the services she could provide: dressmaking, alterations, mending, and embroidery. Mr. Patterson wrote it all down with enthusiasm, asking questions and making suggestions. By the time she left the office, Zelda felt the first small flicker of hope she had experienced in a long time. Over the next week, Zelda settled into a routine. She rented a small adobe house on the edge of town for $8 a month. It had 2 rooms, a fireplace, and a window that caught the morning light. It was not much, but it was hers. She used most of her savings to purchase fabric, thread, needles, and other supplies from the general store. Mrs. Rodriguez helped her spread the word about her services, and within days, women began appearing at her door with mending and requests for new dresses. The work kept her busy, which was good. When her hands were occupied with needle and thread, her mind could not wander to dark places. She measured and cut and stitched, creating order from chaos, beauty from plain cloth. Each garment was a small act of creation, something she could control. Still, the nights were difficult. Alone in her small house with only the sounds of the desert outside her window, memories crept in. She would see Thomas falling, over and over, the surprise in his eyes, the bloom of red spreading across his chest. She would feel the burn of the bullet in her own shoulder, remember the screams and chaos, the way the world had tilted sideways and never quite righted itself. On those nights, Zelda reminded herself to breathe. She focused on the present moment, the rough texture of her blanket, the cool adobe walls, the distant howl of a coyote. Slowly, painfully, she would pull herself back from the edge. 2 weeks after arriving in Castle Dome, Zelda was walking back from the general store with a parcel of pins and lace when she saw James Prescott again. He was leading 2 horses down the main street, speaking quietly to them. One was the chestnut mare she had seen before. The other was a gray gelding with gentle eyes. "Miss Garrett," James said when he spotted her, "how are you settling in?" "Well enough," Zelda replied. "The town has been welcoming." "I heard you have been getting plenty of work," James said. "Mrs. Rodriguez sings your praises. She says you made her a new Sunday dress that fits like a dream." Zelda felt an unexpected flush of pleasure at the compliment. She was easy to work with. They stood there for a moment, an awkward silence stretching between them. Zelda noticed details she had missed before. The way James's eyes crinkled at the corners, suggesting he smiled often. The careful way he held the horse's lead ropes, maintaining just enough contact to guide without forcing. The faded scar along his jaw. "I was about to take these 2 out for some exercise," James said. "Would you care to join me? The desert is beautiful this time of day, just before sunset." Zelda's first instinct was to refuse. She did not socialize. She did not open herself up to connections that could lead to pain. But something in James's expression, open and kind without any pressure, made her pause. "I do not ride," she said. "The gray is gentle as a lamb," James assured her, "and we would not go far, just out beyond the edge of town where you can see the mountains properly." Against her better judgment, Zelda found herself agreeing. James's face lit up with a smile that transformed his features from pleasant to genuinely handsome. He helped her onto the gray gelding, his hands steady and respectful, and then mounted the chestnut mare with easy grace. They rode slowly out of Castle Dome, following a dusty trail that wound through saguaro cacti and creosote bushes. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange, pink, and deep purple. The mountains in the distance glowed as if lit from within. It was, Zelda had to admit, breathtaking. "How long have you been in Castle Dome?" she asked, feeling the need to break the comfortable silence. "About 3 years," James replied. "I came from Texas originally. My family had a ranch there, but I was the youngest of 4 sons. Not much future for me waiting around for scraps. Figured I would make my own way. Do you miss it?" Texas, James considered this. "Sometimes. I miss my mother's cooking and my younger sister's laugh, but I do not miss feeling like I did not quite fit. Here I can be whoever I want to be. That freedom is worth the cost." Zelda understood that more than he knew. "What about the livery? Is that what you want to do?" "For now," James said. "I am good with horses. They make sense to me in a way people sometimes do not. But someday I would like to have a small ranch of my own. Nothing grand, just enough land to raise horses and maybe some cattle. A place where things grow instead of just surviving." There was something wistful in his voice, a longing that resonated with Zelda. She found herself saying, "That sounds nice." They rode a bit farther, then stopped at a rise that offered a view of the valley below. Castle Dome looked small and insignificant against the vastness of the landscape, a brief human imposition on ancient land. James dismounted and helped Zelda down, his hands strong and warm through the fabric of her dress. "Thank you for riding with me," James said. "I know we do not know each other well, but I enjoy your company." Zelda looked at him, really looked at him. She saw sincerity in his eyes, no hidden agenda or expectation, just honest appreciation for a shared moment. "I enjoyed it too," she admitted, surprising herself with the truth of it. As they rode back to town in the deepening twilight, Zelda felt something shift inside her. Not a dramatic change, but a small crack in the wall she had built around herself. It frightened her, that crack. It meant she was still capable of feeling, of connecting. And connection meant vulnerability, which meant potential for pain. Over the following weeks, Zelda saw James regularly. Castle Dome was small enough that running into each other was inevitable. He would tip his hat and offer a greeting. Sometimes they would talk for a few minutes about inconsequential things. The weather, town gossip, the progress of the chestnut mare's training. Other times, they would simply acknowledge each other and move on. Zelda found herself looking for him without meaning to. Her eyes would scan the street, seeking his familiar figure. When days passed without a sighting, she felt a strange disappointment that annoyed her. She did not want to care about anyone. Caring led to loss, and she had lost enough. Then came a Saturday afternoon in late June when everything shifted again. Zelda was working in her front room, which she had converted into a makeshift shop space, hemming a dress for the hotel owner's daughter. The door was open to catch any hint of a breeze. The heat outside was oppressive, the kind that made even lizards seek shade. She heard raised voices from the direction of the main street, angry and escalating. Living in a mining town meant occasional violence, usually fueled by alcohol and boredom. Zelda had learned to ignore such disturbances, to keep her head down and her door locked. But then she heard James's voice, calm but firm, trying to diffuse whatever situation was developing. Her hand stilled on the fabric. Before she could think better of it, she rose and walked to her door. Down the street, outside one of the saloons, two miners faced off against each other. Both were clearly drunk, swaying on their feet, fists raised. James stood between them, hands held up in a placating gesture. A small crowd had gathered to watch. "There is no need for this," James was saying. "Whatever the disagreement, fighting will not solve it. Stay out of it, horse boy," one of the miners slurred. "This is between me and him. That may be, James replied evenly, but you are blocking the street and scaring the horses. Take it somewhere else or shake hands and be done with it. For a moment, it seemed like James's words might work. The miners looked at each other, some of the aggression draining from their faces. Then one of them, the taller of the two, swung at the other. He missed his target and hit James instead, a glancing blow across the cheek that still packed enough force to snap James's head to the side. Zelda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The crowd erupted in shouts. James staggered but did not fall. He touched his face, his fingers coming away bloody, and sighed. That was unnecessary, he said, his voice still remarkably calm. The sheriff arrived then, a grizzled man named Dan Cooper who had a reputation for being tough but fair. He grabbed both miners by their collars and hauled them toward the jail, lecturing them loudly about public drunkenness and disturbing the peace. The crowd dispersed, the entertainment over. James stood alone on the street, pressing his sleeve to his bleeding cheek. Zelda made a decision before her cautious mind could stop her. She hurried down the street toward him. "Are you all right?" she asked, slightly breathless. James looked surprised to see her. "Miss Garrett, yes, I am fine, just a split cheek. I have had worse." "Come to my house," Zelda said. "I have supplies to clean that properly. It will get infected otherwise in this heat." "I do not want to trouble you," James began, but Zelda cut him off. "It is not trouble. Come on." She led him back to her small house, very aware of his presence behind her. Inside, she directed him to sit in the chair by her work table while she fetched water, clean cloth, and the small medicine kit she kept for emergencies. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared the supplies, and she forced herself to breathe steadily. James sat patiently, watching her with those gray eyes. "You do not have to do this," he said quietly. "I know," Zelda replied. She dampened the cloth and approached him. "This might sting." She began cleaning the wound, her touch as gentle as she could manage. The cut was not deep, but it bled freely, as facial wounds often did. James flinched once but made no complaint. This close, Zelda could see the golden flecks in his gray eyes, the faint lines around his mouth, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the ends. "You should not have gotten in the middle of that," she said, focusing on the wound rather than his gaze. "Probably not," James agreed. "But those miners were upset about a card game, nothing worth hurting each other over. Sometimes people just need a moment to cool down. And if they had hurt you worse, then I would have learned to duck faster." There was a hint of humor in his voice. Zelda finished cleaning the wound and applied a small amount of salve. "You should keep it clean. Change the dressing daily." "Yes, madam," James said solemnly, but his eyes held warmth. She stepped back, suddenly very aware that they were alone in her house, that she had touched him, that her heart was beating faster than it should. "You can go now," she said, more sharply than she intended. James rose slowly. "Thank you, Miss Garrett, for your kindness." Zelda nodded, unable to meet his eyes. She walked him to the door and he stepped out into the brutal afternoon sun. He turned back, studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Would you have dinner with me?" he asked. "Tomorrow evening. Nothing fancy, just the hotel dining room." Every instinct screamed at Zelda to refuse, to maintain her distance, to protect herself. But the word that came out of her mouth was, yes. James's smile was worth the fear that immediately flooded through her. 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, she confirmed. After he left, Zelda closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. What had she done? She could not do this, could not open herself up to caring about someone again. The risk was too great, the potential for pain too enormous. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, the risk of living was worth taking. That night, Zelda barely slept. She stared at the ceiling of her small bedroom, watching shadows shift as the moon moved across the sky. She thought about Thomas, about the life they had planned that ended before it really began. She thought about the 2 years she had spent in Silver Creek, moving through her days like a ghost. She thought about the wall she had built around her heart, brick by brick, until she felt nothing. And she thought about James Prescott, with his patient hands and kind eyes, and the way something in her chest loosened when he smiled at her. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Zelda worked on a dress order, but her stitches were uneven, and she had to rip them out twice. She changed her outfit 3 times, finally settling on a green dress that brought out the hazel in her eyes. She pinned her hair up, then down, then up again. By the time 6 o'clock approached, she was a bundle of nerves. James arrived at her door precisely on time, cleaned up and wearing a pressed shirt. The cut on his cheek had scabbed over, making him look slightly roguish. He offered his arm, and Zelda took it, trying to ignore how solid and reassuring his presence felt. The hotel dining room was modest but clean, with checkered tablecloths and lanterns hanging from the ceiling. Several other diners were scattered throughout the room, mostly miners and traveling salesmen. James pulled out Zelda's chair before taking his own seat, a gesture that was both old-fashioned and endearing. They ordered from the limited menu: beef stew for James, chicken and dumplings for Zelda. An awkward silence fell as they waited for their food. Zelda twisted her napkin in her lap, searching for something to say. "Tell me about the chestnut mare," she said finally. "The one you were training when I first saw you." James's face brightened. "Copper, that is what I call her. She has come a long way these past weeks. Still nervous about sudden movements, but she is learning to trust again. Yesterday, she ate an apple from my hand without flinching." "That is wonderful," Zelda said, and meant it. "What will happen to her?" "Mr. Carson will sell her eventually," James said, a note of regret in his voice. "That is the business. But I am training her well so she will go to a good home, someone who will appreciate her spirit." "You care about her," Zelda observed. "I care about all the animals I work with," James replied. "They did not ask to be at the mercy of humans. The least we can do is treat them with kindness and respect." Their food arrived, carried by a tired-looking waitress. They ate in more comfortable silence for a while. The stew was better than expected, hot and filling. Zelda found her appetite returning, something that had been absent for longer than she cared to admit. "What about you?" James asked. "What do you care about?" The question caught Zelda off guard. She set down her fork, considering. "I suppose I care about creating things. Making something useful and beautiful from raw materials. There is satisfaction in that." "Is that why you became a seamstress?" "My mother taught me to sew when I was young," Zelda said. "After she passed, it was a way to feel close to her, and it turned out I had a talent for it." "I am sorry about your mother," James said gently. "It was a long time ago." Zelda paused, then added, "She would have liked Castle Dome. She always wanted to see the desert." They talked more as the meal continued, the conversation flowing more easily. James told her about growing up in Texas, about his siblings and their various adventures. He was a good storyteller, painting vivid pictures with his words. Zelda found herself laughing at a tale about his younger sister teaching the family dog to steal pies from the windowsill. The sound of her own laughter startled her. When had she last laughed like that, genuine and unguarded? As they left the hotel, the night air was still warm but more bearable than the day's heat. James walked Zelda home slowly, neither of them seeming eager to end the evening. Stars spread across the sky in brilliant profusion, untouched by city lights. At her door, James paused. "I had a wonderful time tonight, Miss Garrett." "Zelda," she said impulsively. "You can call me Zelda." His smile was soft. "Zelda, and you should call me James." "I had a nice time too, James," Zelda admitted. "Thank you for dinner." "May I see you again?" James asked. "Not necessarily dinner, just spending time together. I would like to know you better." Zelda felt the familiar fear rising, the urge to retreat behind her walls. But she also felt something else, a longing for connection, for the possibility of something more than mere survival. "I would like that," she said quietly. Over the following weeks, Zelda and James fell into a pattern. He would stop by her house after work, sometimes just to say hello, other times staying to talk while she worked on her sewing. They took evening walks through Castle Dome and into the surrounding desert. They shared meals. They talked about everything and nothing. Slowly, Zelda began to open up. She told James about Thomas, about the shooting, about the 2 years she spent feeling like she was watching her life from a distance. She expected pity or awkward sympathy, but James simply listened, his full attention on her. "That must have been unimaginably difficult," he said when she finished. "Losing someone you loved so violently, so suddenly." "It broke something in me," Zelda said, surprised to hear herself speaking so honestly. "I feel like a wagon with a cracked axle, still functional but fundamentally damaged." James was quiet for a long moment. They were sitting on a flat rock outcropping outside town, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Finally, he spoke. "I do not think you are broken, Zelda. You do not know me well enough to make that judgment," she replied, more harshly than she intended. "Maybe not," James acknowledged. "But I know that you have been through something terrible and you survived. You picked up and moved to a new territory, started a business, built a life. That is not broken. That is strong." Zelda shook her head. "You do not understand. I am not the same person I was before." That Zelda died with Thomas. What is left is just empty. A shell going through the motions. "I do not believe that either," James said firmly. "You are still here, still feeling even if it hurts, still capable of creating beautiful things with your hands. Still willing to help a stranger who got punched in a stupid fight. That is not empty, Zelda. That is alive." Tears welled in Zelda's eyes, hot and unexpected. "I said I am broken and cannot be fixed," she whispered. "Why are you bothering with me?" James reached over and gently took her hand. His palm was calloused from years of working with horses, warm and solid against hers. "Because I am not looking to fix you, Zelda. You do not need fixing. You need time and space and maybe someone who is willing to walk beside you while you heal. If you will let me, I would like to be that person." The tears spilled over then, running down Zelda's cheeks in silent streams. James did not try to comfort her or tell her to stop crying. He simply held her hand and waited, his presence steady and sure. When the tears finally subsided, Zelda felt lighter somehow, as if something heavy had been lifted from her chest. "I am scared," she admitted, "of caring about someone again, of losing someone again." "I am scared too," James said, "of not being enough, of saying the wrong thing, of wanting something I cannot have." He squeezed her hand gently. "But I think being scared and doing it anyway is what makes us brave." Zelda looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the honesty in his face, the vulnerability he was offering her. He was opening himself up just as much as he was asking her to open up. The realization moved something in her, shifted the landscape of her heart. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." After that night, something changed between them. The walls Zelda had maintained began to crumble, not all at once, but gradually. She allowed herself to laugh more freely at James's stories. She shared her own memories, both painful and joyful. She let him into her life in ways she had not let anyone in since Thomas's death. James, for his part, was endlessly patient. When Zelda had bad days, when grief rose up and threatened to overwhelm her, He did not try to fix it or make it better. He simply stayed, a quiet presence that said without words that she was not alone. One evening in August, they were sitting on Zelda's small front porch, watching the stars emerge. James had brought his guitar, an old battered instrument that had seen better days. He played softly, his fingers coaxing gentle melodies from the strings. "I did not know you played music," Zelda said, enchanted by the sound. "My mother taught me," James replied, his fingers never stopping their movement across the strings. "She said music was the language of the soul, that it could express things words could not." "Play something for me," Zelda requested. James played a slow, sweet melody that seemed to capture the peaceful evening, the vast sky above them, the connection growing between them. When the last note faded into the night, Zelda realized she was leaning against his shoulder, completely relaxed. The gesture felt natural, right? "Thank you," she murmured. "That was beautiful." James set the guitar aside and turned to look at her. His face was very close, his gray eyes searching hers. "Zelda," he said, his voice low, "I am falling in love with you." Zelda's breath caught. She had known, somewhere deep inside, that this was where they were heading. But hearing the words made it real, gave it weight and substance. "I am terrified," she admitted, "of feeling this way, of what it means." "I know," James said. "You do not have to say anything back. I just needed you to know. I needed to be honest with you." Zelda thought about the past months, about how James had entered her life and quietly, steadily, made it better. She thought about his patience, his kindness, the way he saw her not as damaged goods but as a whole person worthy of love. She thought about how her heart had learned to beat differently around him, how color had slowly seeped back into her gray world. "I think," she said carefully, "that I might be falling in love with you too, and that absolutely terrifies me." James smiled, soft and understanding. "Can I kiss you?" Instead of answering with words, Zelda closed the small distance between them and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. James's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. When they finally pulled apart, Zelda was trembling. "Was that all right?" James asked. "Yes," Zelda whispered. "More than all right." They sat together as the night deepened around them, Zelda tucked against James's side, his arm around her shoulders. She felt safe there, held but not trapped, cherished but not possessed. It was a new feeling, or perhaps a very old one she had forgotten. Either way, she allowed herself to sink into it, to accept the gift of this moment. As summer turned to fall, Zelda and James's relationship deepened. They were inseparable, spending every free moment together. The town noticed, of course. Castle Dome was too small for secrets. But the gossip was mostly benign, people pleased to see two of their own finding happiness together. Mrs. Rodriguez cornered Zelda one day at the general store, her face alight with joy. "I am so happy for you and James," she said, squeezing Zelda's hand. "He is a good man and you deserve happiness." "Thank you," Zelda replied, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She was beginning to believe it herself, that maybe she did deserve happiness, that maybe her past did not have to define her future. James started talking about his dream of owning a ranch with more concrete details. He had been saving money for years, and he thought that within another year or two he might have enough to buy some land outside Castle Dome. He described it to Zelda with such vivid enthusiasm. A small house, a barn, corrals for training horses, maybe some chickens and a vegetable garden. "It sounds wonderful," Zelda said one evening as they walked along the edge of town. The weather had cooled slightly, making evening walks pleasant again. "I hope you will be there with me," James said. "When I build it, I want to build a life with you, Zelda, if you will have me." Zelda stopped walking, her heart hammered in her chest. Are you asking me to marry you? James turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Not yet. Not officially. I want to do it properly with a ring and everything planned out, but I am telling you my intentions. I love you, Zelda Garrett. I want you to be my wife. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a future with you, whatever that looks like. Tears pricked Zelda's eyes, but they were not sad tears. I love you too, James Prescott. And yes, I want that future with you. They sealed the promise with a kiss, standing in the purple twilight of the Arizona desert, the mountains bearing witness to their commitment. But life, Zelda had learned, was rarely simple. A week later, a stranger rode into Castle Dome. He was a U.S. Marshal, hard-eyed and dusty from travel. He made inquiries around town, asking questions about a man who had supposedly passed through several months ago. The man was wanted for robbery and murder back in Kansas. Zelda heard about the marshal from Mrs. Rodriguez, who heard it from the hotel clerk, who heard it directly from the marshal himself. She thought nothing of it until that evening when James came to her house looking troubled. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately. James sat down heavily at her table, running his hands through his hair. "That marshal. He is asking questions about someone I knew in Texas. A man named Robert Garrett." Zelda froze. "Garrett, that was my married name." "I know," James said quietly. "Robert Garrett is Thomas's brother, and apparently he is wanted for serious crimes." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Zelda sat down across from James, her mind racing. "Thomas never mentioned a brother. He said his family was all dead." "Maybe he was trying to protect you," James suggested. "If his brother was an outlaw, Thomas might not have wanted you to know." "Or maybe Thomas was involved too," Zelda said, the thought making her feel sick. "Maybe I did not know him as well as I thought." "That does not matter now," James said firmly. "Thomas is gone. His brother's crimes, whatever they are, have nothing to do with you." But Zelda could not shake the feeling of betrayal. She had mourned Thomas for 2 years, carried his memory like a sacred thing. What if he had lied to her about everything? What if their entire marriage had been built on deception? The marshal left town after 2 days, having found no trace of Robert Garrett in the area. But his visit left Zelda shaken. She found herself questioning everything about her past, about Thomas, about the life they had shared. James noticed her withdrawal, the way she pulled back into herself. He gave her space but did not disappear. He would stop by her house each evening, sometimes staying for dinner, sometimes just checking that she was all right. His steady presence was an anchor in the storm of her confusion. One night, as they sat on her porch in the cool October air, Zelda finally spoke what was on her heart. "I do not know who I was when I was married to Thomas. I thought I knew, thought I had that part of my life figured out, but maybe it was all a lie." "Does it matter?" James asked gently. "Of course it matters," Zelda said, frustration bleeding into her voice. "My entire identity for 2 years was as Thomas's widow. I mourned him. I grieved for the life we could have had together. And now I find out he might have been lying to me about something as fundamental as his family." "Or he was protecting you from a brother he was ashamed of," James pointed out. "Or his brother turned bad after Thomas left home, or a dozen other possibilities. You will probably never know the truth, Zelda. The only person who could tell you is dead." Zelda slumped in her chair. "I hate that. I hate not knowing." James reached over and took her hand. "Then choose what to believe. You knew Thomas for 3 months. You loved him in that time and he seemed to love you. Maybe that is enough. Maybe the truth is simply that 2 young people found each other and had a brief, happy time before tragedy struck. Everything else is noise." Zelda looked at their joined hands, at the way James held her firmly but not too tightly. She thought about the choice he was offering her, to carry uncertainty forever or to make peace with ambiguity and move forward. "I want to move forward," she said quietly. "With you, I am tired of being haunted by the past." "Then we will move forward together," James promised, and they did. Slowly, painfully, Zelda let go of the need to understand every detail of what had happened. She allowed Thomas's memory to become what it was, a brief, bright chapter in her life that had ended tragically. Not perfect, perhaps not even entirely truthful, but real in its own way. And more importantly, finished. As autumn deepened and winter approached, life in Castle Dome continued its steady rhythm. Zelda's seamstress business thrived. She had more work than she could handle, prompting her to consider taking on an apprentice. James continued working at the livery while saving every penny toward his dream ranch. In December, James finally proposed officially. He took Zelda on a ride out to a piece of land he had been looking at, a beautiful stretch of desert with a seasonal creek and views of the mountains. In the middle of that empty land, with the winter sun shining down, he got down on one knee and offered her a simple gold ring. "Zelda Garrett, you have brought light back into my life. You have shown me what courage really looks like. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me on this land?" Zelda looked around at the empty space, seeing not what was but what could be. A house, a barn, horses grazing, a garden where vegetables grew, children playing, a life built on love and honesty and mutual respect. "Yes," she said, pulling James to his feet. "Yes, I will marry you." They married on a cool January day in 1881, in the small church at the edge of Castle Dome. Mrs. Rodriguez stood as Zelda's witness, and Mr. Carson stood for James. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When James kissed his bride, sealing their vows, Zelda felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be. This was who she was meant to be with. The town threw them a party at the hotel, everyone contributing food and well wishes. There was music and dancing and laughter. Zelda wore a dress she had made herself, ivory silk with delicate embroidery at the cuffs and collar. James wore his best suit and could not stop smiling. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, James leaned down and whispered in Zelda's ear, "Are you happy?" Zelda looked up at him, this good man who had seen her at her most broken and chosen to love her anyway. "I am," she said with wonder. "I really am." They spent their wedding night at the hotel, then returned to Zelda's small house, which was now theirs together. It was cramped with both of them living there, but neither minded. They were building toward something bigger, something better. James continued working and saving, and Zelda did the same with her sewing income. By spring, they had enough money to make a down payment on the land James had shown her when he proposed. The property was 20 acres of desert land with good water rights, enough to sustain horses and a small herd of cattle. They spent every spare moment that spring and summer building their future. James worked on constructing a small house with help from friends in town. Zelda sewed curtains and bedding, prepared to make their new home beautiful as well as functional. It was exhausting work, but satisfying in a way that filled both of them with joy. By late summer, the house was habitable. It was modest, just 3 rooms. A main living space with a kitchen area, a bedroom, and a small room that could serve as an office or nursery eventually. But it was solidly built and theirs. The day they moved in, Zelda stood in the doorway and looked around at the empty space that would become their home. James came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think it is perfect," Zelda replied, leaning back against him. "I think we built something real here." "We did," James agreed, "and we will keep building. This is just the beginning." They furnished the house slowly, piece by piece. James built a table and chairs. Zelda made cushions and rugs. They acquired a bed from a family leaving Castle Dome, cookware from the general store, all the small necessities that made a house a home. Zelda set up a corner of the main room as her sewing space, with good light from a window. She continued taking orders from town women, riding in several times a week to deliver finished garments and collect new requests. James started his horse training business in earnest, working with difficult animals that others had given up on. His patience and skill became known throughout the area, bringing customers from as far away as Yuma and Phoenix. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. They worked hard during the day, James with his horses and Zelda with her sewing. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sunset, talking about their days, making plans for the future. Sometimes James would play his guitar, filling the desert air with music. In the fall of 1882, Zelda realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of emotions, joy, certainly, but also fear. She had built a good life with James, stable and happy. A baby would change everything. She told James one evening after dinner, simply and directly, "I am going to have a baby." James's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: shock, wonder, joy, and finally settling on something like awe. He pulled Zelda into his arms, holding her tightly. "We are going to be parents," he said, as if testing the words. "Are you happy?" Zelda asked, needing to hear him say it. "I am thrilled," James assured her. "Terrified but thrilled. We are going to have a child, Zelda, a little person who is part of both of us." The pregnancy was not easy. Zelda suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon. The Arizona heat made her uncomfortable and swollen. But James was attentive, taking over more of the household duties, making sure she rested, bringing her cool water and whatever foods she could tolerate. As her belly grew, Zelda found herself thinking about the future differently. This child, this new life, represented a hope she had not dared to dream before. She and James were creating a family, putting down roots that went deeper than just land ownership or business success. They were building a legacy. Mrs. Rodriguez offered to serve as midwife when the time came, having delivered dozens of babies in her years in Castle Dome. Zelda accepted gratefully, relieved to have an experienced woman to guide her through the process. The baby arrived on a warm May evening in 1883 after a long and difficult labor. James paced outside the bedroom, occasionally called in to hold Zelda's hand during the worst contractions. Finally, as the sun was setting, a baby's cry filled the small house. "A boy," Mrs. Rodriguez announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Zelda's chest. "A healthy, strong boy." Zelda looked down at her son, overwhelmed by a wave of love so powerful it took her breath away. He was tiny and perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn gray like his father's. His little fists waved in the air, protesting this strange new world he had entered. James came in then, his face pale and anxious. "Zelda, are you all right?" "I am wonderful," Zelda said, tears streaming down her face. "Come meet your son." James approached almost reverently, staring at the baby with wonder. "He is so small," he whispered, "and perfect." They named him Jacob Thomas Prescott, honoring Zelda's first husband while giving him his own identity. Jacob was a loud baby, demanding and strong-willed from the start. He kept them up at night with his crying and needed constant attention, but neither Zelda nor James minded. They were exhausted and overwhelmed, but also happier than they had ever been. Watching James with Jacob melted Zelda's heart in ways she had not expected. He was a natural father, patient and tender, singing to the baby in the middle of the night, changing diapers without complaint, marveling at every tiny milestone. This, Zelda realized, was what a true partnership looked like. Not just romantic love, but building a life together, facing challenges together, creating something bigger than either of them alone. As Jacob grew from infant to toddler, the ranch grew too. James acquired more horses, building his reputation as one of the best trainers in the territory. Zelda had to scale back her sewing business but still took on select projects, working during Jacob's nap times. Money was not plentiful, but they had enough. More importantly, they had each other. In the evenings after Jacob was asleep, Zelda and James would sit together on their porch, just as they had done before becoming parents. The view was the same: vast deserts stretching to distant mountains, stars scattered across the black sky. But everything felt different now, richer and more meaningful. "Do you remember when we first met?" James asked one night, his arm around Zelda's shoulders. "You were watching me work with copper." "I remember," Zelda said. "I thought you were patient with her. The way you did not try to force her to trust you." "I knew she needed time," James said, "just like you did." Zelda turned to look at him. "I was so broken then, so convinced I could never be whole again." "You were never broken," James said firmly, "just hurt. There is a difference." "I am glad you saw that difference," Zelda said softly. "I am glad you did not try to fix me." "You did not need fixing," James replied. "You just needed someone to walk beside you while you healed yourself. I am honored that you let me be that person." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the desert. The distant howl of coyotes, the whisper of wind through creosote bushes, the chirp of crickets. Inside the house, Jacob slept peacefully in his cradle. The horses shuffled in their corral. Everything was as it should be. "Are you happy?" James asked, the question he had asked on their wedding day. "I am more than happy," Zelda replied. "I am content, I am grateful, I am home." The years passed in a blur of work and joy and the occasional challenge. Jacob grew into a sturdy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. In 1885, Zelda gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Marie. She was a quieter baby than Jacob had been, more contemplative, watching the world with serious dark eyes. The ranch continued to prosper. James's reputation brought steady business, and he was able to hire a young man from town to help with the workload. They acquired more land, expanding their holdings to 40 acres. Zelda's sewing business evolved into creating custom leather goods as well, saddles and bridles that complemented James's trained horses. Castle Dome itself changed over the years. Some businesses closed as minds played out. New families arrived while others left. But the core community remained, people who had chosen this harsh and beautiful land as their home. Zelda and James became pillars of that community, respected and valued. Mrs. Rodriguez remained a close friend, her children playing with Jacob and Rose, shared meals and celebrations marking the passage of time. Mr. Carson eventually sold the livery to James, retiring to live with his daughter in California. The newspaper office changed hands twice. The church got a new minister. Life continued its steady, inevitable march forward. Through it all, Zelda and James's love deepened. It was no longer the exciting, frightening newness of their courtship. It had matured into something solid and enduring, tested by sleepless nights with sick children, by financial worries during lean years, by the simple daily challenges of building a life together. They argued sometimes, usually about small things blown out of proportion by exhaustion or stress. But they always came back together, remembering that they were on the same team, working toward the same goals. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James took Zelda back to the spot where he had proposed. The land looked different now. Where there had been empty desert, there was now their home, barns, corrals, signs of human habitation and care. But the view of the mountains was the same, timeless and beautiful. "You remember what I said to you that day?" James asked. "You asked me to marry you," Zelda replied, smiling, "and to build a life with you on this land." "We did it," James said, gesturing at the ranch around them. "We built something real, something lasting." "We did," Zelda agreed. She thought about the young woman she had been, arriving in Castle Dome convinced she was broken beyond repair. She thought about the wall she had built around her heart, and how James had not tried to tear it down but had simply waited on the other side, patient and steady, until she was ready to dismantle it herself. "Thank you," she said to James, "for not giving up on me, for seeing something worth loving when I could not see it myself." "Thank you for letting me love you," James replied, "for taking the risk of opening your heart again. I know how much courage that took." They stood together in the fading light, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something beautiful from the wreckage of Zelda's past. It had not been easy, it had not been simple, but it had been worth every difficult moment, every tear, every leap of faith. As the years continued to pass, Zelda sometimes thought about Thomas, about that brief marriage that had ended so violently. The pain had faded to a distant ache, like an old injury that only twinged occasionally. She could think of him now with a gentle sadness rather than devastating grief. He had been her first love, and that would always be part of her story. But James was her true love, her partner, the person she was meant to build a life with. In 1890, as the territory of Arizona moved steadily toward eventual statehood, Zelda and James celebrated the birth of their third child, another boy they named Samuel. Jacob was now 7, Rose was 5, and both were thrilled to have a new baby brother. The house felt full and lively, echoing with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Zelda was 31 years old, James 33. They had lived in Castle Dome for a decade, had been married for 9 years. The ranch was successful, their children were healthy, their marriage was strong. It was, Zelda thought, more than she had ever dared to hope for when she arrived in this desert town feeling empty and broken. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Zelda found James on the porch as usual. She sat beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder with the comfortable ease of long familiarity. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything," James replied. "How different my life is from what I imagined as a boy in Texas. How grateful I am for all of it." "Even the sleepless nights and dirty diapers," Zelda teased. "Even those," James said, smiling. "It is all part of the same package, the love and the work and the exhaustion and the joy. I would not trade any of it." "Neither would I," Zelda said. She thought about the woman she had been, so certain that she could never be whole again. She thought about the journey from that brokenness to this moment, sitting beside her husband with their children sleeping safely inside. It had not been a straight path. There had been setbacks and struggles, days when she doubted herself and her choices. But James had been there through all of it, not trying to fix her or rush her healing, but simply walking beside her with steady, patient love. "I love you," she said, the words simple but carrying the weight of everything they had been through together. "I love you too," James replied. "Always have, always will." They sat together as the stars emerged, the same stars that had watched over them since the beginning. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of creosote and dust. In the distance, a coyote called to the moon. Everything was as it should be. The next morning brought new challenges and new joys, as every morning did. Jacob needed help with a school assignment. Rose wanted to show her mother a flower she had found. Samuel needed feeding and changing. The horses needed tending. clothes needed washing, there was always something that needed doing. But in the midst of the chaos, Zelda would catch James's eye and smile. And in that moment, they would share a silent acknowledgement of what they had built together. A family, a home, a life worth living. Years continued to roll by. Jacob grew into a young man who loved horses as much as his father did, learning the business with enthusiasm and skill. Rose showed a talent for drawing and painting, capturing the stark beauty of the desert landscape with surprising maturity. Samuel was the adventurous one, always finding new ways to get into trouble, keeping his parents on their toes. The ranch expanded again, now covering 60 acres. James hired more help, teaching other young men the patient methods of horse training that had made him successful. Zelda started teaching Rose and several other young girls in town how to sew, passing on the skills her mother had taught her. The cycle of learning and teaching, growing and sharing, continued. Castle Dome changed around them. Some mines closed for good while new ones opened. The railroad came closer, though it never quite reached their small town. Modern conveniences slowly made their way into the territory. Better roads, telegraph lines, mail service that arrived more reliably. The wild frontier of the 1870s was slowly becoming more civilized, though the desert landscape remained as untamed as ever. Through all these changes, Zelda and James remained constants in each other's lives. Their hair started to gray at the temples. Lines deepened around their eyes and mouths, marks of years spent squinting in the bright sun and smiling often. Their hands became more weathered, scarred by decades of hard work. But their love remained strong, perhaps stronger than ever, tempered by time and trial into something unbreakable. On a warm spring evening in 1895, Zelda and James sat on their porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day. Jacob was in town courting a young woman he hoped to marry. Rose was inside finishing a painting she wanted to enter in a territorial art competition. Samuel was supposedly doing his homework, but was more likely playing with the barn cats. "You remember the night we first really talked?" Zelda asked. "You told me I was not broken." "I remember," James said. "I meant it then and I mean it now. You were never broken, Zelda, just wounded." "There is a big difference. You gave me something precious that night," Zelda said thoughtfully. "You gave me permission to be imperfect, to be scarred and struggling and still worthy of love. I had spent so long thinking I needed to be fixed before I could deserve happiness. You showed me that was not true." "You showed me something too," James replied. "You showed me what real courage looks like. It is not about never being afraid or never being hurt. It is about continuing to live and love despite the fear, despite the pain. You are the bravest person I know." Zelda took his hand, their fingers interlacing naturally after so many years. "We have built a good life, have we not?" "The best life," James confirmed. "Not a perfect one, but a real one filled with love and purpose and meaning." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky deepened from blue to purple to black. The first stars appeared, then more, until the heavens were brilliant with light. Somewhere in the house, Rose laughed at something Samuel said. The horses nickered softly in their corral. A gentle breeze stirred the air, bringing relief from the day's heat. "Thank you," Zelda said quietly. "For what?" James asked. "For everything. For seeing me when I felt invisible, for loving me when I could not love myself, for being patient while I learned how to be whole again. For building this life with me, this beautiful, imperfect, wonderful life." James brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "The honor was mine. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zelda Prescott. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." They remained on the porch long after the sun disappeared, two people who had found each other in the vast expanse of the Arizona desert and chosen to build a future together. Their story was not one of dramatic rescues or grand gestures. It was quieter than that, but no less powerful. It was a story of patience and healing, of choosing love even when fear seemed safer, of trusting that brokenness was not the end but rather a new beginning. As the years marched forward into a new century, Zelda and James grew old together. They celebrated Jacob's marriage to the young woman from town, welcomed grandchildren who filled the ranch with new energy and laughter. They attended Rose's art exhibitions in Phoenix, proud of her talent and determination. They supported Samuel when he decided to become a teacher, using his adventurous spirit to educate the next generation. Through illness and health, prosperity and lean times, joy and sorrow, they remained true to the promise they had made to each other on that January day in 1881. They walked side by side through life, neither trying to fix or change the other, but simply being present, offering support and love without conditions. The small house they had built with their own hands became filled with memories. Children's birthday parties, holiday celebrations, quiet evenings by the fire, passionate arguments and tender reconciliations. The walls absorbed the sounds of their life together. Laughter and tears, music and conversation, the everyday symphony of a family. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1911, their children threw them a party that brought together everyone they had known in Castle Dome over the decades. The hotel dining room was packed with friends and neighbors, all gathered to celebrate the love story that had inspired so many of them. Mrs. Rodriguez, now elderly but still sharp-eyed and energetic, raised her glass in a toast. To Zelda and James, who showed us that true love is not about finding a perfect person, but about seeing an imperfect person perfectly. You have been an example to all of us, a light in this desert community. May you have many more years together. Glasses clinked and voices rose in agreement. Zelda looked around the room at all these people who had become part of their extended family over the years. She thought about how far she had come from that lost young widow who arrived in Castle Dome 31 years ago. That woman had been convinced she could never be happy again, that the best she could hope for was survival. She had been so wrong. Later that evening, after the party ended and the grandchildren were tucked into various beds around the ranch, Zelda and James returned to their porch. It had been rebuilt twice over the years, expanded and improved, but it remained their special place where they connected at the end of each day. 30 years, James mused. It seems like yesterday and forever ago all at once. I know what you mean, Zelda said. She was 72 now, her dark hair completely white, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. James was 74, moving a bit slower than he used to, but still strong and vital. They were old, but they were happy. If you could go back, James asked, and tell that young woman who arrived here in 1880 what her life would become, what would you say? Zelda considered this carefully. I would tell her that the pain she feels will not last forever, that healing is possible even when it seems impossible, that she will find love again, deeper and truer than she ever imagined, that she will build a life beyond her wildest dreams, and that she is so much stronger than she knows. She would not believe you, James said with a smile. Probably not, Zelda agreed, but it would still be true. They rocked gently in their chairs, hands clasped between them, watching the desert stars shine overhead. The same stars that had watched over them since the beginning, constant and eternal, bearing witness to their enduring love. In the years that followed, age began to take its inevitable toll. James developed arthritis in his hands, making it harder to work with the horses. Zelda's eyesight weakened, forcing her to give up the detailed sewing work she had once loved. They slowed down, as all people must, but they faced each challenge together with the same partnership that had carried them through everything else. Jacob took over running the ranch, continuing his father's legacy of patient horse training. He and his wife gave Zelda and James 8 grandchildren in total, a brood of energetic young people who kept the ranch lively. Rose's paintings hung in galleries across the territory, now the state of Arizona, since statehood had been achieved in 1912. Samuel taught at the school in Castle Dome, shaping young minds and passing on knowledge. Zelda and James watched it all with satisfaction and pride. They had built something that would outlast them, a legacy not just of land and business, but of values and love. Their children and grandchildren had learned from their example that love meant patience, that strength meant vulnerability, that healing was possible even after devastating loss. As they entered their 80s, both Zelda and James knew their time was growing short. They did not speak of it often, but the awareness was there, an unspoken understanding that their journey together was approaching its end. Instead of dwelling on what was to come, they focused on appreciating what was. Each sunrise, each meal shared, each quiet moment together. One evening in the spring of 1918, as they sat on their beloved porch, James said something that surprised Zelda. "I am not afraid of dying." Zelda looked at him, seeing the man she had loved for nearly 40 years. "Neither am I," she admitted. "We have lived a good life. A full life. When the time comes, I will be ready." "You believe we will find each other again?" James asked. "Wherever we go next, I do," Zelda said firmly. "What we have, it is too strong to end with death. Somehow, somewhere, we will be together again." James smiled and squeezed her hand. "I like that thought." They sat together as the stars emerged, the ritual that had marked their evenings for almost 4 decades. The desert spread around them, unchanged by the passage of years. The mountains stood eternal on the horizon. And in the house behind them, their legacy continued. Children, grandchildren, the ripple effects of a love story that had started with 2 wounded people choosing to heal together. James Prescott passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cool October morning in 1919. He was 82 years old, surrounded by family, his hand held by his beloved wife. Zelda sat with him as he drew his last breath, tears streaming down her face, but also a sense of peace. They had had almost 40 years together. It was not enough, could never be enough, but it was more than many people got. It was a gift, every moment of it. The funeral brought together everyone from Castle Dome and beyond. James had touched so many lives with his kindness and patience, his skill and generosity. People shared stories of how he had helped them, taught them, inspired them. Zelda listened to it all with pride and grief intermingled, understanding that while James was gone, his impact would continue to resonate for generations. After the funeral, Zelda returned to the ranch house. It felt empty without James, his absence a physical ache. She moved through the rooms they had shared for so long, touching familiar objects, remembering. Their life together played out in memories. The early days of courtship, the wedding, the birth of their children, countless ordinary moments that had somehow added up to an extraordinary life. She thought about the conversation they had had all those years ago, when she told him she was broken and could not be fixed. He had replied that he was not looking to fix her, and he had been true to that promise. He had not tried to change her or mold her into someone else. He had simply loved her, exactly as she was, and in doing so had helped her find herself again. Zelda lived for 2 more years after James's death. She spent that time surrounded by family, watching her grandchildren grow, sharing stories of the past with anyone who would listen. She wanted them to know the history of the ranch, of Castle Dome, of the love story that had made it all possible. On a warm evening in May 1921, Zelda Prescott passed away quietly in her sleep. She was 82 years old, the same age James had been. Her children found her the next morning, a peaceful expression on her face, as if she had gone gladly to whatever came next. They buried her beside James on a gentle rise overlooking the ranch they had built together. A simple headstone marked both graves, bearing their names and dates, and a single inscription chosen by their children. They walked together through life, side by side, teaching us all what love truly means. The ranch continued on under Jacob's stewardship, then passed to his children, carrying forward the legacy of patience and partnership that James and Zelda had established. Rose's paintings preserved the beauty of the Arizona desert for future generations, capturing the landscape that had been the backdrop to her parents' love story. Samuel's students grew up to become leaders in the state, carrying forward the values of hard work and integrity he had learned from his parents. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the desert wind whispered through the ranch, family members swore they could feel a presence, as if Zelda and James were still there, still sitting on their porch, still watching the sunset together. It was a comforting thought, that their love was so strong it had become part of the land itself, woven into the fabric of the place they had made their home. The story of Zelda and James became part of Castle Dome's history, told and retold over the years. It was a story about healing, about patience, about choosing love even when fear seemed safer. It was a story about two people who had found each other at the right moment, when both were ready to build something new from the pieces of their pasts. Most importantly, it was a story about what it really meant to love someone, not trying to fix them or change them, but accepting them wholly, supporting them unconditionally, and walking beside them through whatever life brought. That kind of love, rare and precious, had transformed both of them, had created a family, had built a legacy that continued long after they were gone. The ranch itself stood for decades more, a testament to what two people could create when they worked together toward a shared dream. The house they had built with their own hands sheltered multiple generations. The land they had nurtured continued to sustain life. The values they had lived by influenced countless people who never even met them, and in the end, that was their true legacy. Not the land or the business, or even the children and grandchildren, though all of those mattered. Their true legacy was the example they had set, the proof they had provided that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that patience and partnership could overcome any obstacle, that it was possible to build something beautiful from the wreckage of tragedy. Zelda Garrett, the young widow who had arrived in Castle Dome convinced she was broken beyond repair, had been transformed through love and time and her own courage into Zelda Prescott, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and pillar of her community. The transformation had not been quick or easy, but it had been real. And James Prescott, the cowboy who had seen past her walls to the woman beneath, who had offered not to fix her but simply to walk beside her, had become the partner she needed, the love she deserved, the foundation upon which she rebuilt her life. Together, they had proven that sometimes the most powerful love stories are not about grand gestures or dramatic rescues. Sometimes they are about quiet steadiness, daily choices to show up and be present, patient acceptance of imperfection. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not trying to change someone, but seeing them clearly and choosing to love them exactly as they are. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and loss. But what they had built together continued, living on in the lives they had touched, the family they had created, the values they had demonstrated. In that way, their love story never really ended at all. It simply transformed, becoming part of something larger, something eternal. The desert wind continued to blow across the land they had called home, carrying their memory forward into the future. The mountains stood watch over their graves, eternal and unchanging. The stars shone overhead just as they had during all those evenings spent on the porch, watching and waiting and bearing witness to a love that had endured. And if you listened carefully on quiet nights in Castle Dome, some said you could still hear the faint sound of a guitar playing, a gentle melody that spoke of love and healing, of patience and partnership, of two souls who had found each other in the vastness of the Arizona desert and built something beautiful together. A melody that reminded everyone who heard it that broken things could heal, that love was always worth the risk, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage was simply allowing yourself to be loved.